127 seconds. That is all it took. Thomas Massie stood up, held a stack of offshore banking documents above his head, and asked the question that would create one of the longest silences in congressional hearing history. Mr. Miller, these records show 15 separate wire transfers totaling $2.3 billion routed through Cayman Islands accounts between January and November of last year. The money originated from DHS emergency funds. It passed through shell companies that did not exist 6 months ago. And then it vanished into accounts protected by international banking secrecy laws. So I have a very simple question for you. Where did it go? Miller's face went pale. Not flushed, not red, pale, like blood actively draining in real time. His lead attorney grabbed his shoulder. His second attorney was already standing, but it was too late. The banking records were on every screen in the room, and Massie had not even started counting yet. House Oversight Committee Room 2154, Thursday morning, 10:47 a.m. Eastern. The hearing was listed as routine oversight of Department of Homeland Security financial management practices, routine. That word keeps appearing in these hearing titles, and it keeps being completely wrong. Massie arrived early, 50 minutes before the session started. He had a locked steel briefcase, same one from the concrete audit hearing. Security waved him through without scanning. They knew what was coming. Miller did not. Miller walked in with his standard entourage, 3 attorneys, 2 senior aides that practice confidence he always carries into these rooms. Chin up, shoulders back. The I have done this 100 times posture. He sat down, adjusted his microphone, looked almost relaxed during the opening statements. He thought he knew every question they would ask. He was catastrophically wrong. The first 40 minutes were exactly what everyone expected. Budget oversight procedures, emergency fund protocols, vendor payment timelines. Miller gave smooth answers, professional, controlled. He even smiled once. He was comfortable. He should not have been. Then Massie took the microphone and said 7 words that changed everything. Mr. Miller, let's talk about the Cayman Islands. The room shifted. Not policy, not procedure. The Cayman Islands, offshore banking jurisdiction, tax haven, the place where money goes to disappear. Massie opened the steel briefcase, pulled out a thick binder, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network seal on the cover. He set it on the table with a sound loud enough for the microphones to catch. This is a FinCEN investigation report completed 4 weeks ago. It covers suspicious activity reports filed by international banks regarding Department of Homeland Security fund transfers to offshore accounts, specifically accounts in the Cayman Islands. He opened it between the 12th of January and the 3rd of November of last year. DHS emergency operations accounts made 15 separate wire transfers to accounts registered in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. Total amount transferred, $2.3 billion. He looked up. The transfers were authorized under emergency procurement protocols. Every single authorization form has the same signature at the bottom. He pulled out a document, held it up. Your signature, Mr. Miller. A murmur started in the gallery. Massie continued. Emergency procurement exists for a reason. Natural disasters, security threats, situations where normal bidding processes would delay critical operations. So the congressman wanted to understand what emergency required sending $2.3 billion to the Cayman Islands. He contacted FinCEN. He subpoenaed the banking records. And here is what he found. He pulled out another document. The 15 transfers went to 7 different accounts. All 7 accounts were opened between the 28th of December and the 10th of January. He paused. Every single account that received DHS emergency funds was created less than 2 weeks before the first transfer. The murmur became louder. All 7 accounts were registered to corporate entities, international trade consulting groups, development advisory firms, emergency logistics coordinators, very official sounding names. So the congressman asked the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority for the corporate registration documents. He pulled out a 3rd document. Of the 7 companies that received $2.3 billion in DHS funds, not one has ever filed a tax return in any jurisdiction. Not one has ever registered a single employee. Not one has a physical office that anyone can locate. And not one has ever conducted any business transaction other than receiving money from the United States Department of Homeland Security and immediately transferring it somewhere else. The room went completely quiet. Massie let that statement hang in the air. $2.3 billion sent to companies that exist only on paper, companies created weeks before they received taxpayer money, companies with no employees, no offices, no business operations, just bank accounts designed to receive and move money. He pulled out the next section of the FinCEN report. But here is where it gets worse. Within 72 hours of receiving funds from DHS, All 7 Cayman accounts transferred the money out. Not to vendors, not to contractors, not to anyone providing goods or services to the United States government. He read from the report. The funds were transferred to secondary accounts in Switzerland, Singapore, the British Virgin Islands, and Dubai. All secondary accounts are registered as beneficial ownership trusts, which means the actual account holders are protected by international privacy laws. He looked at Miller $2.3 billion of taxpayer money sent to fake companies in the Cayman Islands, then immediately moved to hidden accounts in 4 different countries. And every transfer authorization has your signature. So the congressman is going to ask you directly, where did the money go? Miller leaned forward. Congressman, emergency procurement during evolving security situations requires operational flexibility. The specific vendors involved in classified security operations cannot always be publicly disclosed. Standard vetting procedures for established international partners. Massie held up his hand. The congressman is going to stop Miller right there because the FinCEN report did not just trace the money, they identified something else. He pulled out another document. Of the 4 countries where the secondary accounts are located, investigators were able to obtain partial transaction records from 2 of them. Singapore and Switzerland. He opened to a flagged page. The Singapore account received $847 million from the Cayman transfers. Within 1 week, that account made 43 separate payments. The recipients included a Washington, D.C. consulting firm whose managing partner is Miller's former chief of staff, a law firm in New York that represents 4 individuals currently under federal investigation for immigration fraud, and a private equity fund based in Delaware whose largest investor is a trust connected to Miller's family. The room erupted, not shouting, worse, the low, angry rumble of people realizing they are watching something much bigger than they thought. Massie let it build for 5 seconds. Then he held up his hand for quiet. The Swiss account received $1.1 billion. That account made 37 payments. The recipients included a defense contractor that employs Miller's brother-in-law as a senior vice president, a nonprofit organization where Miller served on the board until 6 months before these transfers began, and a cryptocurrency exchange that converted $340 million into digital assets that are now untraceable. He set the papers down. Mr. Miller, the congressman is not asking about classified operations. He is asking about $2.3 billion that left DHS, went through fake companies in the Cayman Islands, and ended up in accounts connected to people you know personally. Where did the money go? Miller's hands went flat on the table, knuckles white, that small muscle near his jaw twitching. His attorney was on his feet. Mr. Chairman, these allegations are outrageous and without foundation. My client had no knowledge of any secondary transfers. The committee chairman's voice was firm. Sit down, counselor. Your client can answer the question, but Miller did not answer. And that is when the silence started. Massie looked at his watch, pulled out his phone, opened the stopwatch app. The congressman is going to ask one more time, and he is going to time how long Miller sits there without answering. Where is $2.3 billion that went from DHS to Cayman Islands, shell companies, and then disappeared into accounts connected to your associates? He pressed start. The room was completely still. You could hear the ventilation system. You could hear Miller swallowing. 10 seconds, Miller's hands flat on the table. 20 seconds, his attorney writing something on a legal pad. 30 seconds, a journalist in the back row dropped a pen. It clattered. Everyone jumped. 40 seconds. The chairman leaned into his microphone. Mr. Miller, you are under oath. Answer the question. Miller's jaw moved. No sound. 50 seconds. His second attorney stood up. Mr. Chairman, we request a brief recess. Denied. The witness will answer. Now, 60 seconds. 1 full minute. Massie's stopwatch was on every screen. 70 seconds. A congressman from Ohio leaned into his microphone. Steve, just answer the question. Miller looked at him, looked away. 80 seconds. Massie stood up. Mr. Miller, we are now at 1 minute and 20 seconds. This is a simple question about physical location of $2.3 billion. Where is it? In 90 seconds. Miller's face had gone from pale to gray, that muscle near his jaw twitching visibly. 100 seconds. His lead attorney stood, tried to speak. The chairman pointed at him. Sit down. Your client has a mouth. He can use it. 110 seconds. Massie walked closer to the witness table. Mr. Miller, we are approaching 2 minutes. 2 minutes of silence rather than tell the American people where $2.3 billion went. 120 seconds. 2 full minutes. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking. 125 seconds. Miller's hands trembled slightly. He pressed them harder against the table. The cameras caught it. 120, 7 seconds. Massie stopped the timer, 2 minutes and 7 seconds. He turned to the committee. Mr. Chairman, the witness has refused to answer. The congressman moves to enter the complete FinCEN investigation report into the congressional record. He further moves to refer this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation into potential money laundering, wire fraud, and violation of federal emergency procurement statutes. The motion was seconded immediately. The vote was called. It passed unanimously. Massie gathered his documents. Mr. Miller, 127 seconds. That is how long you sat here rather than explain where $2.3 billion went. That silence tells the American people everything they need to know. These documents are now public. Every wire transfer, every shell company, every secondary account, every person connected to those accounts. The FBI has this report. The Treasury Department has this report. And they are very good at following money trails. Even when those trails go through the Cayman Islands, you had 127 seconds to explain. You chose silence. That choice will follow you. The hearing did not continue. The chairman called a recess. Miller's attorneys surrounded him. Cameras swarmed. Security had to clear a path. But it did not matter because in 2 minutes and 7 seconds, Thomas Massie had traced $2.3 billion through offshore shell companies to accounts connected to Miller's network. And he had forced Stephen Miller to sit in complete silence rather than explain where the money went. Within minutes, the internet erupted. Financial crimes experts analyzing the money trail, former prosecutors discussing the criminal implications, and somewhere, every person whose name appeared in those FinCEN records was calling a very expensive lawyer. This is not speculation. This is a Financial Crimes Enforcement Network investigation report, 1247 pages, 15 wire transfers, 7 shell companies, $2.3 billion that cannot be accounted for, and 127 seconds where Stephen Miller could have explained it, but chose silence instead.